The first German aircraft never made a sound. Then the sky exploded. Snow still clung to the ground outside the improvised Canadian training range in early 1940, the air sharp enough to burn lungs, when the silhouette appeared overhead. It wasn't real, just a towed target, but every man on the line froze as if death itself had arrived. Seconds later, the Bofors 40mm barked, a metallic thunder that shook marrow and earth alike. The shell tore through the canvas target and shredded it midair. Silence followed, then disbelief. Captain Thomas Avery lowered his binoculars slowly. He had seen artillery before. France in the Great War. British batteries on exercises. But this was something else. Controlled. Fast. Relentless. Europe was collapsing. Poland was gone. France would soon follow. Britain stood alone, and above it all, aircraft ruled the battlefield. Whoever mastered anti-aircraft fire would survive. Whoever didn't would burn. The Bofors 40mm gun, designed in Sweden, was supposed to be the answer. But it was temperamental, complex, and unforgiving. Britain struggled to field it at scale. Training took too long. Maintenance was inconsistent. Ammunition jams killed crews. Canada, still seen by many as a quiet dominion, volunteered to help. At first, no one noticed. Factories in Ontario and Quebec began converting overnight. Civilian machinists became weapons builders. Farmers' sons became gunners. Engineers with no combat medals quietly rewrote manuals that hadn't worked in practice. Canada didn't just build the gun. Canada learned it, piece by piece, failure by failure. And while German bombers screamed over London, a secret was taking shape across the Atlantic. Canada was mastering the weapon that could change the war. The Bofors was not forgiving. It demanded precision in temperature, lubrication, loading angle, and timing. Early crews cursed it. If mishandled, it jammed. If rushed, it misfired. If ignored, it killed. Sergeant William Mac McAllister understood this better than most. A former mill mechanic from Sudbury, he had hands scarred by steel long before the war. When he arrived at Camp Petawawa, he didn't see a weapon. He saw a machine that needed respect. Mac began breaking the gun down obsessively. Springs, feed trays, recoil cylinders. He timed reload drills with a stopwatch and rewrote steps that made no sense under pressure. Others laughed, until his crew cut reload times in half. Word spread. Canadian instructors quietly standardized procedures that Britain hadn't formalized. They adapted the gun for cold weather, adjusting tolerances so it wouldn't seize in snow. They experimented with crew choreography, turning chaos into rhythm. For men, one gun, 30 seconds of fury. By late 1941, Canadian units could hit fast-moving aircraft at altitudes others struggled to reach. Reports crossed the Atlantic. British officers took notes. Some pretended the innovations were their own. Canada didn't protest. They were too busy preparing for something worse. When Canadian Bofors crews deployed overseas, they arrived quietly. No parades. No headlines. In North Africa, the sun warped steel and cooked ammunition. In Sicily, Luftwaffe pilots learned to fear the low thump-thump-thump of a gun they couldn't outrun. Canadian crews adapted again, adjusting firing arcs, conserving barrels, rotating crews before exhaustion ruined aim. Private Henri Beaulieu, a French-Canadian gunner, wrote home after his first engagement. The sky was full of engines. Then it wasn't. Bofors guns guarded harbors, convoys, and airfields. They protected landing zones before infantry ever set foot ashore. Often, they fired before the enemy was even seen. The secret wasn't bravery. It was mastery. By 1943, Canadian-trained Bofors units were quietly training others, British, Polish, Free French. The doctrine spread, stripped of its origin. That was fine. Survival mattered more than credit. Then came Normandy. On June 5, 1944, the guns were already loaded. Along the English coast, Canadian Bofors crews stared into darkness, knowing what the next sunrise meant. German aircraft would come. They always did. The gun crews checked sights, murmured jokes, and touched photographs folded into pockets. Mac McAllister ran his hand along the barrel like a priest blessing an altar. When the invasion began, the sky filled with noise, engines, flares, chaos. And then the Bofors spoke. Fast. Accurate. Merciless. Aircraft fell burning into the channel. Others turned away. Many never reached the beaches. By the way, if you're clinging to this moment with me, make sure to hit subscribe. More awaits just ahead. By dawn, Canadian manned guns had protected thousands of lives without ever being seen by the men storming ashore. No medals, no speeches, just silence and smoke drifting over the sea. Part 5. The cost of knowledge mastery came at a price. Gun crews were targeted relentlessly. Luftwaffe pilots learned to identify Bofors' positions and strike them first. Casualties mounted. Barrels overheated. Hands bled. Yet the guns kept firing. In the Netherlands, Canadian crews defended liberated towns against desperate last attacks. In Belgium, they protected supply lines that kept the Allied advance alive. Everywhere, the same pattern repeated. Where Bofors' guns were properly handled, losses dropped. The war ground on. Canada said little. When victory came, the guns fell silent. The Bofors was celebrated as a war-winning weapon, but rarely was Canada mentioned. Manuals credited others. Museums simplified the story. The men went home. Mac returned to Sudbury. Henri opened a small shop in Quebec. Factories reverted to civilian life. The secret faded into footnotes. But the knowledge endured. NATO doctrine. Post-war air defense. Modern anti-aircraft principles. All traced, quietly, back to the men who learned the gun when no one else could. History remembers explosions. It forgets preparation. Canada's role in mastering the Bofors 40mm was never loud, never glamorous. But it saved cities, convoys, armies. It saved lives. And sometimes the most powerful weapons in war are not the ones that roar the loudest, but the ones mastered in silence.